I'm here to talk about meaning, myth, magic, and mind-mending medicine, because I like alliteration. In fact, I like all manner of poetic devices. And today we're going to be talking about poetry and life, and how the two intertwine, and how the one affects the other, and how the other affects the one. So let's begin, as we mean to go on, with a poem. And you might need to help me out with this. There was an old man on a roof who said, "I'm entirely aloof. I cannot explain what is wrong with my brain, but I feel I have absolute truth." Proof, very good. Yeah, proof. Excellent, thank you very much. And how do we know it's proof? The proof of the poem is in the rhyming. And we know it's proof because of the structure of the poem. Because a poem has metre and it has rhyme. And metre organises words in space. So we know by the end of the first line, it's a limerick and it's going to go to diddly diddly doof in the next one. And we know by the end of the first line, we know quite a lot about the very last word, which is going to be proof in this case. So today we're going to be talking about how structures are coming down and imposed upon ideas. And things like that. We're also going to be talking about block. So we know a little bit about this man by the end of this story. And we're going to be talking about metaphor. What kind of meaning can metaphor give us? Or do we live in a world where the only significance is statistical significance? And if we live in such a world, what kind of poverty do we live in? And finally, we're going to be talking about inspiration, which is where poetry comes from. So, another poem. There was a young buck in Japan, and that young buck was me, and I moved there when I was 23, and it was 1999, and I hooked up with a Japanese woman, and she didn't speak very much English, I didn't speak very much Japanese, and one day she invited me along to a party. She said there was going to be a strange substance at this party. And like I say, we didn't really understand each other's languages. She didn't need to explain very much more. I was sold anyway. And when I turned up, I found this, and I was quite surprised to find it. The ladies in their outfits along one side of the room, gentlemen on the other, the cross of Caravaca, the Virgin Mary, the smell of incense. A whole load of different ideas organised according to a structure. Ideas I was familiar with, but not particularly comfortable with. And I made a beeline for the only other foreigner in the room, because everyone else was Japanese, and I said, "Is this some kind of a church?" And he said, "Yes, it's a funky church." I'm going to tell you a little bit about this funky church, how it works. It's called Santa Daime, and we don't do very much other than praying and drinking ayahuasca and singing and dancing. So this is what the dance looks like, and the dance kind of goes like this. I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's a kind of two-step. And it's not the kind of thing you'd like to do on your own at the discotheque, but in a group setting like this, it puts the geometry of this particular session into time, into order. And geometry is a way of organising things according to space, a little bit like metre is a way of organising things according to time. And so what do we do? We move backwards and forwards, and we do a lot of singing. What are we singing about? Some of the songs are kind of calls to different spirits. Some of them are moral instruction, and that moral instruction is always set embedded into a poetic story. So I'm going to give you an example of how it works. We don't really have too many thou shalt nots. In fact, we don't have any thou shalt nots. We don't talk about belief and things like that. But we do say things like this. Para ser irmão legítimo é preciso juramento. Não brigar com seu irmão e nem trocar seu pensamento. Which means to be a legitimate brother, you need to make a decision. You need to make a promise. Don't fight with your brother, and also don't mind. And this is a verse set into a song, and a song set into a book, and a book set into a whole musical tradition. So you've got all these kind of ideas bouncing around, and the morals kind of, like I said, the morals are embedded into the poetry, and the dance is also embeds that poetry, that metre, that rhyme into the movement and into this moving geometry. So we're organising ideas in space, and we're organising ourselves in we're organising ideas in time and organising ourselves in space. This is what it looks like. Take see it's quite animated, and people are knocking their maraca a couple times a second. Every time they knock the maraca, they're reminding themselves, and they're exerting the fact that they're part of this structure and maintaining this geometry. Because in Daimi, the structure is primary, and you are secondary to that. It's an imposed structure, and that's why people have one of the things that people have don't really gel with it sometimes, because the structure is there. For example, you have a fiscal, you have a guy looking after the ceremony, and his job is to, if you have to lie down, for example, you're feeling sick, he's going to go and put someone else in your spot to maintain that geometry, to maintain that structure. So, and of course we have this Daimi. But what is Daimi? What's ayahuasca all about? There was a young buck in Japan whose tea said, "I am that I am." So ayahuasca, what is ayahuasca? You ask different people what ayahuasca is, they're going to give you different answers. Ayahuasca never told me anything about DMT or MAOIs or anything like that, but that's one of the stories you're going to hear. So let's just run through that really quickly.
It's trial and error.
Pardon?
It's trial and error.
Let's try it. So this is the story you might have heard, monoamine oxidase inhibitors which come from the vine, which block these pesky enzymes which otherwise would let the DMT go into your brain. I'm sure you've heard this story, and it's a nice story. It's probably not the story that we tell in the Daimi. We tell a different story. In fact, we tell a story about the vine being a king, King Jagubi. And the king goes and wakes up the queen, the haiya, which is the leaf, and the leaf gives her light and visions. And of course there are two different ways of looking at something, but they're both metaphors. Or is one of these scientific truths? Is one of these truth? Is it a lock? And we have this kind of lock and key model, but they're not locks, they're not keys either. It's a way of talking about microscopic goo and what's happening at a very, very tiny level. And these two different ways of looking at the world, two different metaphors, bring up different questions, bring up different ideas. For example, one of the things that we say, like I said, is that the king wakes up the queen. So the king is already awake. Now, if you look in indigenous situations, in a lot of places they just drink the vine on its own. And the vine has its own psychoactive properties, it has its own visionary properties, it has its own revelations that come through it. And in fact, this story about DMT and the MAOI is really a very, very small part of the story. Dates back to the McKenna brothers. Even just the interaction between harmine and harmaline is immensely complicated, and then you take all the other thousands of chemicals that are in the leaf, thousands of chemicals in the vine, and thousands of chemicals in your body, and they're all interacting in a very complex way. And I'm going to leave that for a second. So these different metaphors generate different knowledges. So for example, this biochemical metaphor, according to Callaway and Grob, they suggested that SSRIs are contraindicated. That means if you're on antidepressants, and you go along to Daimi session, or you go along to neo-ayahuasca session, the first thing they're going to ask you is, are you taking antidepressants? And if you say yes, they won't let you drink it. So that's already 1 in 10 Americans out, and of course ayahuasca, we think, has a beneficial effect on depression. Now, is this true? No. Well, certainly there's no empirical evidence for it. In the last 15 years since it was suggested, no single report of any death or doubtless case of serotonin syndrome that could be attributable to ayahuasca and SSRIs. This comes from a professor of psychiatry who's also with the UDV, and he has a number of patients who take antidepressants and go and drink ayahuasca. It's not a problem. However, so why do we hang on to this idea? Why does this have so much more credence than what the indigenous people are saying? Why is this metaphor so much more pervasive? It doesn't have any science behind it, and it's a theory. This is what another chap said, Eddie Fresca, who's a fantastic psychiatrist. He said the traditional ayahuasca diet recommends a type of banana which theoretically be prohibited by the MAOI safety diet. So we've got, it's a plantain, so we've got the indigenous people saying you shouldn't eat certain things, and we've got these chaps in white coats saying you shouldn't eat these other things. And actually they're not telling the same story because they come from different metaphors. The diet may serve a very rational function to increase brain serotonin by tryptophan intake. This is really interesting. So why haven't we looked further into this? Because we're not interested in their metaphor. And their metaphor is a little bit different. They might say, for example, the ayahuasca spirit doesn't like the smell of pork. Right? Doesn't make any sense in the biochemical pattern. So let's move on from metaphors. Of course, how do you learn more about ayahuasca if you're not going to follow this metaphor? Well, it's a king. So you approach it with respect and you ask it what you want to know. That's what we do. So where does this idea of MAO inhibition come from? 1952 was discovered by mistake, and then we've applied this one idea to the entire functioning of ayahuasca. I'm just going a little bit further into the metaphor, this biochemical metaphor. What else what else does it provide us with? Penicillin, Viagra, nitrous oxide, LSD. Does anyone know what all these chemicals have in common? They were all discovered by mistake, as was every single class of psychiatric drug. So, how well is this psychopharmacological metaphor doing? And are those drugs useful to us? There was a young buck in Japan whose teeth said, "I am that I am." He went to Brazil. So off I went to Brazil to look into the roots of this tradition, and they date back to a man called Raimundo Irineu Serra, and he moved from one side of Brazil to the other side. He was a 2-meter tall black man, and he encountered people who were very, very much shorter than him. There you can see them, and he also encountered the Hunikuin Indians, who were probably even more short than those other people, and he started drinking ayahuasca, probably with these people, we're not entirely sure. And he, in the indigenous tradition, they use ayahuasca with icaros, and icaros contain the essence of certain plants, certain forces of nature, certain animal spirits, and things like that. But he was working with it in that way, and one day he was out walking, and he was visited by, according to our legend, the Rainha da Floresta, the Queen of the Forest, and she said to him this, she said, I'm going to translate it for you. Look, I'm going to give you some hymns. You're going to leave behind this business of humming and singing, humming and whistling to learn how to sing. And he said to her, don't do this, my lady. I don't know how to sing at all. And she said, well, I'm going to teach you. And the following day or another day, he was looking at the moon, and she said to him, now you're going to sing. And he said, but how am I going to sing? It's very difficult. And she said, you're going to learn. I'm going to teach you. Open your mouth. And he said, but how? And she said, open your mouth, now estou mandando, which is a very forceful way of saying, am I not ordering you? It's what a Brazilian mother might say to her children. And so he opened his mouth, and the following song came out. I'm going to sing a little bit of it. It goes like this. Deus te salve, lua branca, da luz tão prateada, tu sois minha protetora. E Deus, tu sois estimada, oh mais divina do coração. And on. Quite a long song, and it all came at once, according to our legend. And there's the rest of it. And in fact, I've done some interviewing with people from this tradition, and they tell me things. They talk about the songs. They sometimes come in dreams. They sometimes come in a kind of hypnagogic state. They sometimes come spontaneously. They sometimes come with a great desire to burst into song, but they nearly always come all at once. They come as a complete set, complete thing. So, inspiration, we're going to look at some other... So there are these 3 ideas we can draw out. It was against his will, it came from a higher power, and it came complete. Now, we can have a look at some other inspired figures, like Nietzsche, for example. He talked about revelation in the sense that something becomes suddenly visible and audible with indescribable certainty and accuracy. One is the mere incarnation, mouthpiece, or medium of an almighty power. I've never had any choice in the matter. Nietzsche's interesting because he wrote very, very quickly. He wrote the first section of Thus Spake Zarathustra in 20 days. In his sickest winter, he was in bed with tuberculosis and he couldn't move, but he produced this work which has changed the nature of Western philosophy forever. Another chap, Mozart, he said something similar. Nor do I hear in my imagination all the parts successively, but all at once in a pleasing, lively dream. And then Mark Pesky, who came up with the protocols of cyberspace, which is what virtual reality is built on, and he said, all the cyberspace protocols, wham, it came to me just like that, and I saw them. He was on acid. I got the big picture, but the big picture said, okay, well, you know roughly how to make it work, now you have to go in and do the detail, right? And this is something that often happens with inspiration, whether it's psychedelic or not. It seems to come, the big picture comes, but then the detail is left out, and we have to work it out later. Onwards and forwards. There was a young buck in Japan whose teeth said, I am that I am. He went to Brazil and fell terribly ill. And I did, I got really ill. This was me, fresh-faced and curly hair, with a puppy that I had just rescued. And I was living in his house on 6, and my next door neighbour, actually things started to go bad even before I got ill. My next door neighbour was called Feliciano. His nickname was Leal, which means a lion, and he was a dangerous murderer, among other things. He used to carry around his rifle and his big machete. He was a truly, really scary man, and he'd been ripped off some years ago, and basically had it in his head that all the gringos owed him something, and he made my life an absolute misery. I was pursued by him, I had to hide all night on several occasions. Anyway, one day, before I realised what a nutcase he was, I was out cutting jagubi in order to make some ayahuasca, and I got bitten by a sandfly, and you can see the bite there. And the bite grew, and it grew, and it became a disease called leishmaniasis. People started telling me, oh, Danny, this is very, very serious. You have to go and take injections. You have to take injections of antimonium tartrate, heavy metal, into your veins. And if you take them today, it'll be 120. If you take them tomorrow, it might be 180. If you leave it to next week, well, it might be 250. And that's what the next stage of the disease looks like. It gets pretty nasty, and the next stage, it can attack the cartilage in your nose, and your ears, and your throat, and your stomach. So people got quite insistent with me. They said, you have to take your injections. Look, I'll put you in a car, we'll drive around Rio Branco, and I'll show you the old guys who've lost their noses. And then you can make your decision. So I called up all kinds of different people. I called the Brazilian Medical Health Service. I called up my sister, who's got a specialism in tropical medicine. They all told me the same story. You have to take injections. This was problematic for me because of plot. We're going back to poetry now. The plot of my life really wasn't pushing me in the direction towards taking these medicines. I hadn't taken any pharmaceuticals since I was 15 years old, and I maintain a great deal of scepticism about the pharmaceutical industry. And I was also halfway through writing a book, which I'll tell you about in a second. So then the other reason this was problematic is because some of our songs speak very directly to this. For example, this one says, I'll sing it. Which means, I cure everything, I expel everything with the power of the Divine Father. Now, and this is another one. Now, medo de morrer, se sair correndo é pior para você. Which means, don't be scared of dying. If you run away, it's going to get worse for you. And this is something I hold take quite seriously. I believe, along with Jung, that if you don't face things that arise internally, then they present themselves externally as fate. And if you don't deal with them when they present themselves as fate, then they present themselves again in a more aggressive form. And so, why was this such a problem? Well, I'd had about 6-7 years at this point of all kinds of magic arising from the combination of this drink and this ceremony and this and the words in the songs. And I can remember all kinds of instances where my ideas had bounced off the words, and then something in my real life would happen. Someone would give me whatever thing I was requiring, which I'd been thinking about, all kinds of magic. And I also had 2 friends who'd cured terminal cancer, or they stopped taking their medicine when they were told they were going to die of cancer, and they went and they drank lots of Daime, and both of them still fine. So I had no reason to doubt these songs, but I found myself in a pickle. I was in a very serious situation. Didn't want to lose my nose. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I decided I would take a dose of Daime in ritual conditions and have a think about it. And so I did that, and I had a series of visions. And the first visions I saw were of all the various people who told me, showed me their scars. They said, look, I've had leishmaniasis, you've got to go and have injections, otherwise you're going to lose your nose. And I saw them, and Daime has, like many psychedelics, has this fantastic capacity to make you see the broader picture. It kind of draws you away from the particular into the broader. And I saw these people's lives through a broader lens, and I saw that all of them had something else going wrong. One of them had these strange bumps all over his leg. Another one had really bad joint pain because the antimonium had attacked the joints. Another one of them was just pig ignorant, and he hadn't learned whatever lesson he should have learned. Another one was really greedy and going to fights all over the place because of his greed, and his greed is quite important. He has quite a lot of status in the Daime world, and his greed expands over the entire world and casts this kind of foul shadow across the world. Anyway, so this is the first thing that went through my head. And the second thing was, I remember what I was doing in Brazil. Now, when I left for Brazil, I went with 2 very specific ideas. A bit like at the beginning of the poem, ordering my words, ordering my ideas, and those ideas, kind of, I think they impose a structure or the nature of our lives. And one of the reasons I was going to Brazil was to learn about the power of daimyo. And here was a perfect opportunity, like a fantastic plot twist, saying, well, here it is, you can try it out. So that seemed to be a good idea. And then I remembered that I was writing years at the time writing this book, and suddenly I was going to become a liar by injecting myself. It didn't fit in with the plot of my story. It didn't fit in with the rhyme scheme. And then I thought about other things, and I thought about these various mystical traditions I'm interested in, and all of them, they exalt suffering. Suffering has an important function, transformatory function. In Buddhism, dukkha, the first noble truth, is suffering. Christ on the cross, suffering in order that he can be reborn. Bye. The Nigredo phase in alchemy, and the shamanic vision of dismemberment. And also the hangman. I've been interested in tarot for quite a long time. You have this image, have this figure of the hangman who is going through this kind of hideous experience, and at the end of it he emerges as the mage and the master of letters. So, having thought about all this, thought about my situation, I thought, okay, well, I'm here for a very good reason. Why would I break off this story halfway through? And I decided I was going to treat it with daimyo. So I found myself curandero, and I said to him, I'd like to treat leishmaniasis with daimyo. And he said, you can't treat leishmaniasis with daimyo. It comes back, this disease comes back. You might fix it, and then 10 years later, you might come and take your nose off. And I said, I'm not interested in that. I'm here to treat it with daimyo. And he said, okay then, well, I'll do it. And he put his hands over his ears and he sung a line of a song to me, and he sang this line. It went, Deixa quem quiser falar, faz o que eu te mandar. And what that means is let those who want to speak, speak, and do what I tell you. And that I is the divine power. And what he was telling me was not to get mixed up in other people's stories, other people's plot lines about what was going on. And so I did. So I started a cura. It lasted 8 months. I drank an enormous amount of ayahuasca. Sometimes I was drinking, well, for 4 months I was drinking every day, first thing in the morning at 4 o'clock. And I kind of had to isolate myself because everyone else in that very small community, in that very messy, horrible community that I was living in, all they wanted to know about was when I was taking my injection. So I really had to. It was a pretty rough time. Now my wife decided, my ex-wife. Excuse me, my dear. My ex-wife came out to look after me, and this is you know, I still had a great deal of feelings for this woman, and she came out, and within 3 days she'd gone crazy, and I had to look after her, and it all came back. And one of the things that ayahuasca does is it's emetic. It makes you throw up. So in one sense, it takes the parasites out of your bodies, those bits of your organism which aren't fitting in with your own story, with your own mind scheme. But also it has this kind of other level of emetic action, the spiritual emetic, psychological emetic, and it seems to bring out those things which aren't serving you, which aren't, like I say, in your mind scheme, and throw them up in front of you. And thanks to the daimyo, I managed to get rid of that woman. So one day she was still with me. I was cleaning the wound. I had to clean it 4 times a day with these various different teas and stuff. And I said, "Oh my God, there's something moving in there." And she said, "No, there isn't. You're fine. It's just in your mind." And I said, "No, there's something moving." And there was. There were 8 worms, and I had to take worms out of my flesh, little ones. But all the things, I can tell you all kinds of horror stories of what happened. But all the things that happened to me during this experience, they all had. They're all metaphors of something. They all had a kind of an import. For example, that taught me a lot about the miracle of fleshy incarnation and the difference between will and body. So I kind of got better. I was getting better, but I went crazy. I went very, very crazy. I had people doing ceremonies underneath my house when I left for the weekend. I was being robbed. It was a very, very bad place I lived in. And I went away to a place called Fortaleza. And this is another community, a much better community, much better state. And there I met, there was a woman who kept on following me around. And I was completely paranoid at this point, and I thought she was a crackhead, and I thought she wanted to rob me. And I really didn't want her to go anywhere near me. But anyway, she was following me around. And one day she found me in the kitchen, and there I was playing my tarot cards. And she went and she drew out, she said, "Can I have the tarot card?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." She drew out a tarot card, and it was the lover's card. And I immediately tried to disabuse her of any confusion because I was celibate, not only because I was sick and that's part of my cura, but because right from when I started writing this book, I was under the impression, and I'm still under the impression, that it was guided by a very jealous muse, very jealous female spirit. Certainly when everything had gone terribly wrong with women through that entire period. And so anyway, I didn't want anything to do with her, but she followed me around very dutifully for the next couple of weeks. And then the festival was finished, and I had to go back to this place, and I was on my own. I'd already lost 10 kilos, I'd already lost a wife, I'd gone crazy, and I was going back to this place. Going back to, and the poetry wasn't lost on me. There's Danielle, or not called Danielle in Portuguese, in the Lion's Den. And so I went back to this place with this woman, and I want to tell you a little bit about rhyme, how rhyme fits into the story. That's always rhyme. Rhyme is how different words bounce off each other, and in another sense, words are symbols, and it's how different symbols appear at different points in your life. And there might be symbols that appear in dream, and there might be symbols that appear in divination, or there might be symbols that just appear here, and they appear there. Anyway, so there we were back in that house on sticks, in the Lion's Den, and this woman, she would tell me her dreams in the morning. And one day she told me this dream. She said, we were in a place with all this broken glass, and we fixed the glass, we sorted out the glass, and then a little girl came and plaited my hair, and now it's a dream. And then that day we didn't have a whole lot to do, but we did have to go and take a shower, and we went to this place that she'd never been to before, which was the Feijio house. It was where the ayahuasca was made in this community by crackheads, basically. But anyway, so we're in this place, and there we went, and as we arrived, she said, this is the place I was in my dream last night, and I thought, yeah. And then we sat down on a muddy bank, and she started scratching at the ground, clawing at the ground. Oh, there's my magic pen. Clawing at the ground and pulling out chunks of glass. And we pulled out 6 sacks of glass out of this place. And that was quite creepy. And then we went to a neighbour's house, and a little girl at the house came and plaited her hair. Yeah, really, really creepy. And something about the plait there, the way my story and her story were intertwined. And there was another story that I learnt about a year later. So there'd been a guy who was living in this community, and he wasn't drinking ayahuasca, but he was doing very traditional Brazilian black magic. And what it involved was smashing together bottles of rum, bottles of cachaça, and stamping on the glass and not cutting himself, and then burying the glass. And this is how you curse a place in Brazilian macumba, if you want to do it. So some of the glass had been remembered and they'd been ordered dug up, but this had been forgotten, and somehow this story had come into her dream and bounced off with a rhyme into life. Weird. So off we went. I actually got better, thanks to her and thanks to a number of other things. Mostly thanks to her, actually. So I got better and went off to Bolivia because I was running out of my visa, and while we were there, I decided to buy a present. I bought a present of a tarot deck. And all the tarot cards were printed normally, except for one card, which was printed a bit wonky. Can you guess what the card was? It was the Lover's card. And so there I was, and I was still paranoid, I was still crazy, and went to the internet shop one day, and 2 friends of mine sent me emails saying they dreamt about me, and another one sent me an email saying she just got pregnant, another one sent me an email saying he just had a child, and I thought to myself, I organised my thoughts into order, and I said, I think if I go back and get this woman pregnant, then all my problems will disappear. Because I was better by then. So I went back to the hospital and opened the door, and there she was. She said, let's have a child. And so we did, because I'm a sucker for plot lines. And so 9 months later, we had a child. In fact, we had 2 children, and here they are, Sophia and Janaina, and apparently some men make women ovulate double. I really like that story.
She's just like her dad looks, she's pointing at a little spot.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see that both of them were born with birthmarks.
Ah, there you go.
And there's one, and there's the other, and there's the place that my scar was on my chest. So that was quite creepy. That was another rhyme, another symbol popping out. And a couple of years later, when I went back to Curandero to tell him this story, he said he wasn't particularly impressed. He said, "Oh, I left a tag with it," because in the context of that kind of poetic matrix of Amazonian shamanism, this isn't strange at all. And these kind of symbols weave in and out of our lives. There was a young buck in Japan whose tea said, "I am that I am." He went to Brazil, fell terribly ill, but he came home a different man. So that's the end of my first poem. I've got another poem to share with you, another part of the talk. But I think I'm going to take a few questions now, if there are any, and you can all give your brains a rest. So you be sharp, because it's going to get really weird in a minute. Any questions?
Do you have a scientific background, or were these epiphanies just sort of something that expressed themselves while you were undying?
Well, I've got a scientific background. I did a degree in life science and history and philosophy of science. The epiphanies, they tend to happen with diving, and also outside of diving. That's one of the interesting things, is kind of embedding yourself in one of these traditions. It's not just when you're on it, it does give you a broader perspective anyway. You do
You mentioned your friends that you saw that these were these people that had these conditions, and you saw things on them whilst you were in diving. So I was wondering whether these epiphanies or these images or these an expression of
Yeah, so that was whilst I was on it, and in fact that's not science. I mean, if you look at any of the science, they will say you've got to take injections for that kind of that thing. And in fact, some years later, I was chatting to someone about it at a wedding, and I didn't realise he was a doctor, and I was telling this story, and he said, well, of course, 1/3 of cases of leishmaniasis clears up without any help. All you had was a placebo. I'm thinking, placebo. What is a placebo? What kind of metaphor is that? And what kind of world do you live in? Anyway.
Have you found like drinking dynamite with the intention to heal something? Have you found that any kind of like archetypal mythologies came up in your journeys, and that the whole thing actually was you were enacting a kind of like myth and ill?
Well, that's a very good way to move on to the next poem. But the short answer is yes. The long answer is another poem. Goes like this. Would that souls could easily learn the lessons that a lesion lends. Flesh to dripping fluid turns, body quickens in defence, but putrefying acid burns. Ulcer opens, worse portends. Blood to poison, flesh to worms. Terror strikes and fear descends. What will has this companion? So I had my sojourn in Brazil, and I had all kinds of crazy experiences. And I came back to England, and I had a young family. I had 2 kids. I had a wife to look after. I had to get my head down and get to work, basically. And my life hadn't really gone the exact direction that I thought it would do. The plot confused me at this point, because I thought I'd done the whole hangman thing, and I thought now I would come home and sell my book, which I finished. But no publisher wanted it, and no literary agent wanted it, and no one really wanted to buy it, although Nelson bought one. Thank you very much, Nelson. Nelson bought one of the first editions. I don't know how he got through that. So it wasn't really working, and I didn't have time to be investing in this kind of vanity project. So I thought, what am I going to do about this? It was weighing heavily on my mind. I did feel very driven to write this book, and I think it's quite an important book. Certainly to me. And so I kind of thought about mythology here, this mythology of the hangman. And there's a couple of these figures suspended between the worlds, and they all have something to do with either fire or writing. An obvious one would be Jesus Christ, the Logos, the Word made flesh. But I think we've had enough kind of Christian vibes for today, and we can go a little bit more heathen. So to talk about Odin. Odin was another character who he was going through his life. And one day he was plucked out of his everyday life, and he was stuck up on a tree between the worlds, out of space and out of time. And a raven came and plucked his eye out. Has anyone had their eye plucked out by a raven? So a friend of mine, what happens when your eye gets plucked out by a raven? When I was a very young boy, a friend of mine came back from France with some bangers, and we put one in a bottle like you would and blew it up, and a bit of glass went into my friend's eye, and he had to go to hospital. And he said that he had an eye patch on, and he said that when he went to reach for a door, he would kind of miss the door because and when he was trying to get peas on his fork, he would miss it, because if you lose one eye, if you lose the sight in one eye, you lose your own sense, you lose your own perspective. And this is what happened to Odin. He was plucked out of his life as a normal man, stuck up, out of time, out of the world, and lost his own perspective, and had this broader perspective on what's going on, and he was given a gift, and that gift was the runes, the writing. And from that moment on, Odin always spoke in rhyme. He never spoke in prose. And again, we're back to this story of the writer, of the runes and what they can do. Odin was also a magician, fine magician. And magic is another way of organising symbols into order. And for example, you might be doing a rite, you might have 7 candles, they'd be green, you've got the incense of rose, and you're probably trying to get the help of Venus, because all these things are allied towards Venus. And the way you organise your rite, the way you organise your rite, same word, is how you compose this structure of the world. So you have this word rite. You also, this is why a grimoire, an old book of magic, is called a grimoire, because it comes from the same root as grammar, and grammar is how you structure words. And a spell, of course, is spelling. And when you're spelling, you're organising symbols in order to make meaning. So I thought, what am I going to do? I used to be quite into magic. I was in a cult called the Church of Random Ethics when I was at university, and we used to meet up in a basement. It was chaos magic. And remember the first session, he said, what should we do? And I said, well, let's invite Ronald McDonald. And they said, Ronald McDonald, are you crazy? He's far too strong with that for us. Let's stick with someone we can deal with, like Satan or someone. And we'd done I'd done a few rites with these people, and I'd really done myself quite serious damage. The day after one of the sessions, I had an all-day migraine, was babbling in tongues. First and only migraine I've ever had. So I went very, very easy with ceremonial magic. It's not really my gig. I was quite into tarot and quite into kind of magical symbolism, but actually getting on robes wasn't really my thing. And the very first talk I went to on magic was a couple of witches in Manchester, and they said, experiment with what you like, but steer clear of Ouija boards, and don't do Goetia until you really know what you're doing. So Goetia, what is Goetia? Goetia is Solomonic magic. King Solomon was charged with making the temple on earth a reflection of the majesty of heavens, and this is a large task for a man. So he decided he was going to enlist the help of the most powerful forces that he could get his hands on. And these are the earth movers, the bulldozers, the heavy explosives of the astral plane, and these are the demons. Now, demons have a rather bad reputation, but then so would bulldozers if people used them without really knowing what they're doing. So would explosives, in fact. You don't want the Israeli army using explosives and bulldozers. But they can be very useful. What am I going to do? But still, it's a big deal doing Goetia. And this chap was coming over to England, and his name was Lon Marlowe Duquette. He's a tarot reader and a fantastic writer on magic. And he gave a talk, and Nelson invited me along, and so along I went, and he gave a long talk about Goetic magic. I was like, okay, very interesting. And then he was doing tarot readings as well, so I went along for a tarot reading. And 2 cards came out, which pertained to my situation with the book. I was asking about what I'm going to do with this book. Tower and the 3 of Wands. And then he shuffled the cards away, and we did another operation and drew out some more cards. And the 2 cards came back. This time they had the devil in between them. And he said, from one tarot reader to another tarot reader, what do you think this is about? And I said, well, I'm kind of thinking about doing some demonic magic. And he said, well, I think that's probably a very good idea. Why don't you take 2 of these cards from my deck? And he had a ceremonial magic deck, and each of the cards has a demon's name on it. So I took 2 cards, and he said, well, write those names down, and when you get home, look up the description of these demons, and if anything resonates, then you're kind of on the wrong track. And that's what I did. Hangman. Thoth as wisdom of the world. Oh, it's quite cool. That's the magician there. That's Thoth. You see it in his right hand. As King Solomon commanded them into the vessel of brass is called Savnok. He is a marquis, mighty, great and strong, appearing in the form of an armed soldier with a lion's head, riding on a pale-coloured horse. And he can afflict men for many days with wounds, and with sores rotten and full of worms. He giveth good familiars at the request of the exorcist. He commandeth 50 legions of spirits, and his spear seals it. So there are a couple of things which really struck me about that, not least the affliction of wounds and rotten sores, but not just that. There was also, like I say, my problems all began when I moved into the lion's den, and Savnok appears in the form of an armed soldier with a lion's head, and there was Leal carrying his gun and his knife around. And also he was riding on a pale-coloured horse. And the reason I was out there was because I was writing this book on the apocalypse. The subtitle of my book is, well, the trilogy is The History, Psychology and Poetry of the Apocalypse. So this seemed very apt, and then I looked up the days of this demon Sabnock, the Marquis Sabnock, and he has 4 days which pertain to him, a section of 4 days in the year, and the last of those days is the 28th of October, which not only is today, but it's also my birthday.
Happy birthday, Danny!
So isn't that curious that in the cycle of time, and that symbol seems to be coming back. Something else interesting about this is that I kept on drawing this card here, which is the card of the chariot, when I was thinking about my wound, and you can see there that it's a grail with kind of blood in it, which looks quite a lot like my wound, and it's also, if you add up the numbers of my birthday, that's the card you get. So anyway, all this kind of fitted together quite neatly, and I decided, well, then I really should I should do a little ritual, and I got my friend Nelson over here, give us a wave, Nelson. Nelson is the finest go-to magician in London. Any problems with demons? Go and talk to him. So I set about writing an evocation of Sabnock, and I started writing one night, and got a few ideas down. Started writing a second night, got a few ideas down. Started writing with my magic pen on the third night, and it just flowed, and I got this quite a long poem, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. I'm going to need a bit of help with this poem. The last line goes like this. It goes, so mote it be. When I say so mote it be, I want you all to say in response, so mote it be. Let's practice. So mote it be.
So mote it be.
That was very good. Now, bear in mind, the person who does this most quietly will be pursued to the end of their days by the demon Sabnock. So, and actually by this time things had already started moving. I'd already got, a publisher had got in touch with me, Rob Cypress, who's not here, who's meant to be bringing up a whole stack of books. I don't know where he is. But anyway, he'd already got in touch with me, but he said I needed to do some very serious editing in this book, cut it down into 3. So the kind of nature of my write changed a little bit. I'm not going to tell you exactly what it was all about, but it was about something about writing. And so we met up on an auspicious day, myself and Nelson, and we took the ritual baths, and we abluted ourselves in the ritual, no, I told you that bit already, and we put on the robes, and everything was prepared, and the seal was prepared, and we focused our attention towards the east, which is in that direction, and called forth the archangel of air, feeling the cold breeze in our faces. This is the archangel Raphael, and behind us in this direction, feeling the fecundity of the sea and the humidity, the archangel Gabriel, turning this way behind me, focusing our attention on the fire and the force and the severity of the archangel of fire, Michael, turning our attention back your direction to the gravity and weight of the archangel of earth, Uriel, wherein all the seeds of the future are kept. Having done that, we did the borderless ritual, and we did the various openings, and we came to the invocation of Sabnock, and I'm going to read it to you. Would that souls could easily learn the lessons that a lesion lends. Flesh to dripping fluid turns, body quickens in defence, but putrefying acid burns. Ulcer opens, worse portends, blood to poison, flesh to worms. Terror strikes and fear descends. What will has this companion? What life lives within this boil? What will with mine own will contends, and smites my skin to me in toil? Marquis Sabnock here attends, but where the foible of his foil, why doth hell this torment send into my breast, and take as spoil my self-made flesh, and so where ends the arc of my dominion? In truth we never end at all, as through the world the soul extends, where worlds cross a crucible sits, and countless waters blend. With fire blazing mutable, the archer draws the bow, and sends a bolt to worlds more beautiful. Thus the weary soul transcends the limits of its prison. Thus does Sabnock make amends, for shedding flesh does free the soul. To his corporals Sabnock lends weapons that they may control, and bind their will to greater ends, realise a higher goal. Hang the man, the soul ascends, for flesh is naught, where will is all, as mage he is risen. As once ye came by insect bite, so this night come ye peaceably. There within my soul's dark night, I met thy task obediently. Worms did breed beneath thy blight, and eat my tissues greedily. Cut forever that which tied my will to corporality, and thus I won my liberty. Come ye, Sabnoch, rend the veil, come without deformity. Deformed was I by your ordeal, thy kiss was my calamity, which broke mine own hermetic seal to purge a deep-held malady. 8 months did pass for it to heal, through dire and drawn-out purgatory. Hard won was my supremacy. This night, Sabnoch, come as friend, clothed in crystal clarity, speak in ways we comprehend, familiar without enmity. With this working, we suspend the habits of reality. Closed, our circle has no end. Let we all be one company in unity. So mote it be.
So mote it be.
And then we closed our ceremony by performing the various little rites and putting our attention back in the east to the Archangel of Wind, feeling the breeze on our face and feeling the speed and intelligence of the Archangel Raphael. And behind me, fecundity of the sea and the spray and the smell of the sea. The Archangel Gabriel to my right, the power and the fire of the Archangel Michael, and there to the left, solidity, gravity, and patience of the Archangel Uriel. And then I took myself home, got into my normal clothes, and but I was kind of limping actually on the way home because I developed a rather painful issue in my digestive system. And the next day I could barely walk, and the day after that I could barely crawl. I was in absolute agony. My guts had gone wrong. And I took myself off to the clinic, and the clinic had a look at me and said, go directly to accident and emergency, you're in a state. And so I went to accident and emergency, and the whole time I was still scribbling this book, because we'd done the rite, but I hadn't actually written up all the words, which is what I wanted to do in the book of Sabnoch. And so there in the hospital I was subjected to a demeaning mechanical operation. No pharmaceuticals, you'll be pleased to hear. And I think Nelson helped me with some of his astral buddies as well. And I got out of there all right. But when I left, I realised I'd actually left the seal of Sabnoch in the hospital. It's the seal of Sabnoch here. And it ended up in the bin where all the puke and kind of bits of tissue, the bin which is going to be incinerated. And this is quite funny because this is what you do with the spirits. If they don't do what you tell them to do, you threaten them. You say, I'm going to put you in a censer with all the foulest things I can imagine, and then I'm going to burn you. But you don't have to do that if the spirit is doing his job. So I took him out of the censer and I took him home. And I got a whole lot better. And one thing that was really interesting was I'd done this rite for writing, and the next day when I woke up, when I actually got back to writing, I found that my writing was joined up, which is something which hadn't happened for decades. I've been an English teacher for so long, I've been printing. My actual physical writing has changed. So this is the talk I wanted to tell you. This is the story of poetry and symbol and myth, and how they weave in and out of our lives if we can take a broad perspective and watch out for the omens and watch out for the symbols. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got some time for some questions. We've got about half an hour or so, and then we'll have some wine. More wine. So any questions from the floor? Everybody, say hello. Hello.
Okay. I think so. As a man with a decent appreciation of plot and rhyming scheme, could you say a bit more on why you decided to pretty much ignore the lesson of nearly every story ever and get mixed up with demons.
Which stories are we talking about?
You know, like fairy tales, like myths,
Yeah.
like
No, I've seen it. You're talking about the Mickey Mouse one where he casts a spell and it's cleaning up his house and you can't stop it.
No. I mean just generally, you know, as even your description goes, then like I'm not saying bad. I'm just thinking explain more about your thought process.
Well, the thing is, the demons, they seem to take an interest in you rather than the other way around. This whole kind of story had already got going. All those kind of things happened before I even started looking into what the nature of Savnot was. And I'd kind of seen parts of my life where I've been incredibly unlucky, and in retrospect, the luck turned out to be bad luck, turned out to be good luck. So, and this is kind of how demons work. Demons are already working in the lives of some people, but if they're not channeled towards the correct end, if they're not disciplined and not ordered, then they cause you trouble when they could be causing you help. If that makes any sense. But you've got to bear in mind, when we talk about demons, there's a long history of the Catholic Church which was against all kinds of entities. All these shamanic entities, which, when they saw them, they just thought they were all devils. We don't really need to buy into that particular reading of demons. They're a bit more complex than that.
At least it was a bit misunderstood. Generally. Any more questions? I'll just jump in with one. Oh, go on.
Well, we have to ask about the serpents and what we are as humans, our DNA, what makes us, the knowledge, the fear we have of knowledge. Can you just...
Good question. Well, I can tell you what the serpents meant. One of my very first Daime sessions, I had a very clear image of these two kind of winding. They weren't snakes, but they were kind of tubes coming out of the Daime. And it's again coming to this thing of light and dark and good and bad. A double helix, like you've got there, it's going in the same direction, but the one is going one way and the one is going the other. And I think there's this kind of interplay between what we think of as good and bad, but isn't really good and bad. These two are kind of weaving their way through our lives. That's kind of what I'm getting at with the symbol there. And also I had worms wriggling in my flesh.
So how do you feel about ayahuasca being used out of the context of Santa Daime and the tradition Master Nemu handed to us? Do you think it can be dangerous, or what do you think?
About 2 months ago, I got a call from a friend of mine here, and she said that there was a girl who'd been found on Hampstead Heath. Can you all hear me?
Better if you use the mic. Okay.
Oh, so there was a girl who'd been on. She found on Hampstead Heath in a real state, and she had come back. She'd been in Israel and she'd been drinking a whole lot of ayahuasca in Israel, and she'd come back and she was a little bit sketchy, and then she'd taken some mushrooms, and she'd been in a real state for about 4 or 5 days at that point. So me and my wife went round to the house with our kids, and we kind of know a little bit about what was going on. And she was super paranoid. She was really jumping at every noise. She was kind of doing all kinds of weird things, like sitting in the bath in her clothes and opening all the doors in her house. And her parents and her family didn't really know what was going on, didn't really know how to deal with it. Right. The thing about ayahuasca, it's very easy to drink ayahuasca, and it's very easy to open doors. But closing doors is something that's actually quite. It's not that difficult, but it needs to be learned and it needs to be contained. So I don't have any problem with people drinking ayahuasca in whatever format they want to do it, but they need to understand that they're not under the protection of anything. And in a particular lineage, if you do it right, you're under the protection of those spirits and that structure. Ayahuasca is wonderful, but it's not a joke. It's very serious stuff. And, lots and lots of things have gone very badly wrong in the ayahuasca world.
Hi Danny. I hear quite a bit of John Dee, Crowley, Kabbalah, all these things, and you centred it around ayahuasca. And you've used the ceremony of day to hold it together and keep it in control and make little poems. But I think the same thing can be done with LSD, and we all come from the same mix of traditions, and it's just, I'm not belittling you, but I'm saying that that's your way of doing it, and it's not necessarily be all and end all. Yeah, very good. Yeah, and you're using Crowley's tarot, and etc. etc.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Uncle Al. Yeah, and of course there's all kinds of different ways up the mountain. And you know what James Fadiman said, there are acid people and there are ayahuasca people, and quite often they don't seem to get on. Not the people, but the actual, you know, I can't take acid. It's far too much for me to deal with. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't impose any psychedelic on anybody, you know.
I'm going to jump in with one actually, Danny. How does all this fit in with your kind of background and schooling in philosophy of science? Where does this fit in with that?
Well, very early when you study philosophy of science, very early you can see that it's just riddled with holes. Even like Baconian science is just fundamentally, the idea that you see three swans and therefore you assume that all swans is just logically, it's not correct. It's more habit than law. Basically what I was mostly interested in was the sociology of science. The sociology of science is a shit fight of different institutions cutting off funding and refusing to print things and denying replications. I'll give you one example. Jacques Benveniste, who was a French immunologist, started looking at the high dilutions. His research was replicated in 21 different labs. This was like he was the head of the French immunology department, a really top scientist. He was working with Yves Rocard, who was the guy who invented the French atom bomb, and he was working with working with a whole lot of super powered scientists. Yves Rocard was using divination to find, when he was studying those diviners, he'd find water underground, and he lost his plant. If you look even a little bit into sociology of science, you can see it's a battle, it's real politics. And there is some truth that comes out of science, but there's a whole lot more to the story.